Rohingya Voices panellists. The others did speak yesterday and were unable to come today. And of the two that we left, one is not even a Rohingya, so I'm not sure how he's a Rohingya voice. The two panellists that we have with us are Abdul Ahmed, who is a restless being, and I suggest that... Sorry? Mabra, what did I say? I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Right. Mabra, and you might, when you speak, start off by telling us what restless beings are. And Mungani, because we've got the two of them, I've asked or said to Mabra that if he wants to speak for up to 15 minutes, that's fine. If he doesn't want that much, that's fine. Mungani, however, has already spoken lots. And so I'm going to cut him off at 10 minutes. And we also want to have as much time as we can in this session for comments and debate and Q&A, because there's not been much time for that. And so if we keep the introductions to the maximum of 25 minutes, that'll leave us a good 45 minutes for discussions afterwards. So Mabrur, you're first. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. 7 minutes left of the morning. Thank you very much to Dr. Bias and to UCL on your request. So Dr. I'll give you a quick introduction about Restless Beings. We're a human rights organisation based in London, working internationally. We've been in operation for about the last 13 years. And we've been working on the Rohingya cause, particularly for the last 11 years. So today I want to really speak about the crisis of citizenship and the role of legal status for the Rohingya and their future, really. So obviously, as everyone knows, the Rohingya have been on the backlash of both Burma's military and the government since the 1960s, but obviously most emphatically and violently in 2017. And so therefore the idea of normality lies heavily on the legal status in the country of origin, Burma, but also in Bangladesh, where they now find themselves. So neither in Burma nor in Bangladesh is the mere existence recognized in a legal capacity that gives any semblance of hope for their future. So the absence of notions like citizens in their home nation of Burma, or even being accepted as refugees in Bangladesh, obviously leads to complications that inevitably has restrictions on what can be regarded as a normal life. Anyway, through a number of research projects and contextual and legal histories, landscape of hopes and aspirations of the Rohingya, both in Burma pre-genocide flight and in Bangladesh post-genocide flight, was constructed by Restless Beings. And this is really kind of a summary of that study that we did. Aspirations held in Burma and the changes in those aspirations now in Bangladesh act as a good measure of the extent of the psychological and social damage that the genocide of 2017 has had. There are people in the camps currently who for the past 2 years have been living on a diet of rice, lentils, basic vegetables like potatoes, maybe on the odd occasion some small fish, and that's been the same for the last 2 years. The luxury of having 3 meals a day is not had. The luxury of having a cold drink in the searing heat is not had. The luxury of sleeping at night without worrying about rats biting off their fingertips and sleeping without fear also is not had. And obviously that's the condition of the Rohingya in the Cox's Bazar camps. The condition of the Rohingya in Burma, I'll leave that with you to think about. Our study focused on 150 participants, and they were interviewed over a period of time from November 2018 through to early 2019 for this study. And they were really asked about 3 key areas. Firstly, they were asked about the privileges or the facilities that they had access to in Burma and now in Bangladesh. They were asked about their aspirations that they held in Burma and now in Bangladesh. And finally, they were asked about where they felt they were better off in Burma or in Bangladesh. In summary, here are some of the conclusions. Whereas in Bangladesh, the Rohingya respondents' most popular answer was that they felt they had access to security and education in the camps. In Burma, the access was wider. So there was access to education, access to healthcare, access to property, and to employment. So the education, I know it's been talked about quite a lot yesterday, but the education facilities provided in Bangladesh are currently flimsy, I would say, in the sense that the quality of education being offered is insufficient, and crucially, the staff that are being hired are unqualified. So in terms of the education itself, a lot of it comes down to the eligibility of receiving that education. And as you know, currently the Bangladesh government has not shown any appetite in improving education beyond the primary years. The second issue is around employment. So the Rohingya are not formally legally allowed to be employed as such, and so they act as volunteers. And then the local NGOs, they hire nepotistically in the sense that they don't necessarily go and look for teachers who are the best trained, who are able to teach children in difficult and challenging situations. Rather, they go for what they can get and the people who they want to get in the local surroundings. Of course, there is a language barrier there, which is a problem as well. And then you have the huge realization that girls are actively discouraged beyond primary years in pursuing education or even voluntary employment by the Rohingya community themselves as a result of a kind of deep conservative interpretation of Islam as well as cultural sensitivities. So the second focus now on the aspirations held in Burma and the aspirations held in Bangladesh also show quite a lot of area for discourse. So in Bangladesh, the most popular response of aspirations were for peace, for money, for aid, and crucially, a return back to Burma. The aspirations of those, the aspirations held of the respondents in Burma were different. They were for better livelihoods, for a betterment of family conditions, and for citizenship. So the fact that in Bangladesh, the idea that peace, money, and aid are what people are aspiring for clearly illustrates the condition that the Rohingya refugee population face in Bangladesh. And while we're on that, Bangladesh actually does not formally recognize the Rohingya as a Rohingya. And I think someone mentioned this earlier on. They're known as forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals, FDMN. So last year, the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh actually visited London at LSE, and I was invited to a discussion with him. And I pressed him on this issue. I said, you know, why do you not refer to the Rohingya as Rohingya and give them an initial FDMN instead? And he explained to me that this was as a result of a bilateral agreement with Burma, whereby Burma will not use the term illegal Bengalis so long as Bangladesh does not use the term Rohingya. So clearly Bangladesh has stuck to their end of the bargain and not calling the Rohingya. But in Burma, obviously, the term illegal Bengali is still used. Furthermore, on the issue of status through language, the Bangladesh government also do not formally recognize the Rohingya as legal refugees. It is therefore no surprise that the Rohingya refugee community in Burma, in Bangladesh, overwhelmingly 82% of our respondents wanted to return to Burma. So the idea that Bangladesh is a pull factor, it's a myth. The final area that we focused on was where the Rohingya felt that they were better off, Burma or Bangladesh. So 68% of our respondents said that they were better off in Bangladesh. This is largely due to the fact that they have peace and security there, but also another reason that was cited quite commonly was the fact that they had the ability to express their religious freedoms better. Obviously, there's still 32% of those people who wanted to return to Burma. And that again shows you the pull that Burma has as a homeland, as a motherland for the Rohingya, and they hold Burma dear to themselves. Yesterday, I'm not sure if many of you have seen, but we received news that the Cox's Bazar camps are flooded. And also yesterday's environmental discussion that was kind of alluded to as well. Damage, casualties as a result of natural disasters like cyclones and flooding continue to be a threat for livelihood in the Rohingya camps. Other threats that we find in the Rohingya camps are that females are obviously marginalized on multiple layers. Human trafficking is a growing problem, particularly the trafficking of young females. In the camps last year, my co-director Rahima, while she was collecting evidence on dignity, actually physically saw with her own eyes young girls and women being snatched away in broad daylight. On one occasion, one of our team members in Cox's Bazar questioned military personnel who were nearby, and the military personnel off record suggested that actually the military and the police have a very tough time of regulating this issue of trafficking and, of course, young females for sexual exploitation. And just on the issue of the camps as well, the setup of the camps in the evenings is very different to the setup of the camps in the day. There are different axes of hierarchy which exist in the evening compared to what happened in the day. So in the day when foreigners are there, and when you have things like camp majis who are supposedly in charge, it changes quite differently in the evenings, where other types of things, so for example, leaders from religious backgrounds, leaders from prestige families back in Burma, criminals, people who are involved in Yaba, Arsa, all are in the camps in the evening. It's a very different way that the camps are administered in the evening without the watchful eyes of the military and foreigners. Basunchar, again, it was mentioned yesterday. It's really imperative, I feel, that the Bangladeshi plans of relocating, or probably more accurately, forcibly removing 103,000 Rohingya next month are challenged sufficiently. There can be no doubt that that island is not fit for purpose. The purpose being hosting a refugee community. British designers, Chinese contractors, Bangladeshi Navy have designed, built, and implemented an island which can basically be described as a modern-day slave prison island. I repeat, it's not fit for purpose for a refugee population. I call on all of you here present, whether you're from journalist background, academic background, activist, legal professional background, to plead to the Bangladesh government to rethink its strategy on Basunchar. And especially considering that Bangladesh has shown such remarkable leadership in the face of a genocide. It's not in character with what Bangladesh has done for the last 2 years and has been applauded by the international community for its effort to now start this crazy experiment. Chris Sidotti mentioned yesterday, actually, that something which is underreported and which is actually probably the biggest threat right now is the condition of the Rohingya remaining in Burma. In the past fortnight, Burmese authorities have had an internet blackout in Rakhine State on the kind of basis of the fact that AK Arakan Army are now in combat with the Burmese military. This morning, actually, while I was sitting, just before I asked Barrister Sarah a question, I received an SMS. But this morning, I spoke to one of my sources in Burma, and she's in South Bukidnon, and she was telling me about huge food restrictions that she's had. For the last 3 months, she has not received any food rations from WFP. Last week, she lost her husband because he had gangrene in his leg after being beaten by military because he was caught fishing. Access to healthcare is non-existent. I actually asked her this morning, have you thought, or are there any ideas of sympathy towards the Arakan army in connection with the fact that they're obviously fighting the Burmese military? Is there any ground for sympathy? And she replied quite firmly and said, actually, the AA have been part of the persecution that the Rohingya faced in 2012 and 2017 as well. We've got to be really careful. The internet blackout, the cutting off of food, the cutting off of education, the cutting off of healthcare. This is all leading to another wave of immeasurable violence, I believe. In essence, the Rohingya right now find themselves at an intersection of intersection, if you use the definition like Crenshaw and others when discussing feminist theory. Firstly, the first set of intersections, the Rohingya in Burma are ethnically different to the ruling mass. They are linguistically different. They are culturally different. They are socially different. Females amongst that, of course, are further marginalized as a result of their womanhood, and their agency is always dampened down by patriarchy within Burma, but also within their own community. And the fact that the group, the Rohingya, are Muslims on top of that leads to yet another level of marginalization. And that is the intersection that the Rohingya face in Burma. Now, post-genocide, throwing now in Bangladesh, throwing the fact that they are not recognized as citizens in Burma. They are not recognized as citizens, as refugees in Bangladesh. They're not recognized for their identity, Rohingya, in Burma or in Bangladesh. They're not recognized with representation in discussions and negotiations of camp management in Burma or in Bangladesh. They're not recognized intellectually for their opinion, for example, in Basunchar. They're not being protected by the UN because of the vote, the veto vote of China, Russia, and also to a lesser extent, but still pertinent, Indian support to Burma because of geopolitical interests. So the Rohingya find themselves at an intersection of intersections, if you like, subsectionally marginalized. Subsectional meaning completely uncomparable, and then obviously marginalized in the sense of where they're at. The future of the Rohingya can and should only be in Burma, their motherland, their home nation. If this is not supported by the international community through academia and media, then really we can all hold our hands up for watching another ethnic group being totally and irreversibly destroyed. If it's not supported through political will from Bangladesh, but more significantly from superpowers in Europe, US, China, and India, then the notion that democracy and human rights and economic advancement go hand in hand is a fallacy. It shouldn't be tolerated any longer. It should be challenged and dismantled at every single opportunity if we are to remain true to the spirit and concept of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Umunzani.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I categorized what I wish to say into several different categories. The economic dimension of both the genocide and the almost post-genocide. I put almost because in the eyes of the Burmese military leadership, this is still an unfinished business. I did not invent that word. That came straight from the mouth of the senior general Mayor. Unfinished business. And also, I'll touch on accountability, justice, and international legal instruments, and the issue of the United Nations, both Security Council and the leadership at the Secretariat. In July 1978, Far Eastern Economic Review, then based in Hong Kong, ran an article with the title, Burma Style of Apartheid. In the first two opening sentences, the author, William Mutton, likened or projected two scenarios. The Rohingya, one scenario, will most likely become the Palestinians of Asia. They have become Palestinians of Asia without the resistance, without Intifada, without Hamas, without the support of Iran or any other state. I think after having been involved in the various projects of trying to demilitarize Burma in terms of society's thinking, as well as making a dent in the power structures and institutions of the military, or trying to, quote unquote, educate my peers in the military who are in top commands of the institution today. For 31 years today, this year. I've been very dismayed by the intellectual failures of international policy. Policies, I should say, there are multiple policies. When it comes to Burma and what the understanding of the issue. You know, if you're a medical professional, you know diagnosis is so important. Sometimes like one diagnosis is not enough, you seek second opinion. And so the problem, as I see it, in relation to Rohingya issue, is the international community either willfully or inadequately misread the state of Myanmar and the strength of the manufactured genocidal racism toward this particular community. Legibility of the state. When you cannot read the problem properly, and people like me, who can think like perpetrators, I don't feel like perpetrators, I can think like perpetrators. And the voices that come forward, though a tiny minority, myself included, calling it a genocide when using the G word was surefire way to discredit yourself. I stuck to my position. The second thing is, Aung San Suu Kyi is not simply the problem or the manufactured icon imposed on Burma or like promoted around the world. She actively participated in this process. It isn't Western fantasy. It isn't Western white male or white female fantasy, liberal fantasy that has been imposed on her as an icon. She actively contributed to this. And then to a degree, her life was a heroic story. But at this point in history, we need to hold her accountable, not offer this farcical separation of civilian government led by Aung San Suu Kyi, overseeing a very fragile transition in a very difficult position, in a situation with immense complexity. All of those, in the words of George Orwell, would be humbugs. In 2016, October, when the first quote-unquote security clearance operation, what Azim yesterday called trial run, was conducted, the Defense Ministry held a press conference, called all the senior diplomats and press corps to the Ministry of Defense, and explained that they were pushing back the Muslim terrorists. And the Foreign Office in Rangoon telegram here or email FCO in London described Aung San Suu Kyi's government as, in quotes, coalition government in effect. If Suu Kyi and NLD leadership are in coalition government with the military, they are equally responsible. They must be held equally responsible. And so we need to do away with this farcical notion that Burma is transitioning into, flawed but nonetheless better civilian system. So the second point is we heard too often, too conveniently, that Russia and China stand in the way of Security Council action. Intervention, Chapter 7. That's the only one the Burmese would sit up and listen. Chapter 7, intervention, authorized, mandated by Security Council. Well, short of that, in Gert Rosenthal's report, dated 29th of November this year, internal assessment of UN's performance, essentially systemic failure. UN is not a future generation robotic Uber driverless car. Systemic failure. Where are the humans? We all drive the car. You cannot tell the police that, system fails and although I'm behind the wheels, I killed someone. Therefore, I must be acquitted unequivocally. No, that won't work. But why should that work for the United Nations leadership? Rosenthal report pointedly said there are actions that human managers, leaders, starting with the Secretary General, could have done. Mobilize the private sector around the world, restrict the Burma's access to EU markets, Western markets, international financial sectors, World Bank, IMF. None of that was done by the Secretary General. This is shocking in light of the fact that when Guterres, was the head of UNHCR, he went to have a face-to-face meeting with Thein Sein, then ex-general and president of Burma in the transition period, July 2012. Thein Sein officially told Guterres, we want this Bengali population, misframing the Rohingya, our own people, as Bangladeshi. We want these people either to be in apartheid-like camps, to be financed by the United Nations. We want them to be transported. We will pay for the fuel. Guterres dismissed it, but when he became Secretary General, done nothing. The intent of the government was stated face to face with the head of UNHCR. Even without the intent to commit a genocide, creating apartheid-like camps is an international crime. Apartheid is an international crime. And Guterres did nothing. Now, on the ICJ, Andrew Jackson, US president, had this famous or infamous quote before the turn of the 19th century. Supreme Court ruled against the president on something. He said, now the judges have made their ruling, let them enforce it. So ICC, we need to separate ICC action from what justice will mean materially for the Rohingya. Justice, in my view, and in the words of many Rohingyas that I know in the camps and in the diaspora, will only be served when they can reclaim their land, their ancestral land, when they can get their full and equal citizenship rights, their identity fully restored, when they are compensated, restituted for whatever they've lost. There's another option that has not been seriously explored. Yesterday in the Netherlands, the Dutch parliament, by 2/3 majority, asked the Dutch government to file a case against Myanmar using the Genocide Convention. One of 150 countries, member states, that have signed and ratified the convention. Just 1 minute, I'll shut up. Economic development. Some of us call for total boycott of Burma in all senses of the word boycott. Sports, cultural, educational, institutional, economic, political, diplomatic, military. I think to offer or to only focus on the military when genocide has always been a societal state process. Society and states are involved. You know, Gohagen wrote this book, Hitler's Executioners, which won Germany's one of the highest awards, where Jürgen Habermas wrote, read the citation. Essentially, the book indicted the entire society, Hitler's execution. I want this society indicted as a genocidal society, not simply single out the military, because this is a process that the military led and society popularly supported, and Aung San Suu Kyi covered up and whitewashed. Today, we have 68 kilometers in length of killing fields, bulldozed and primed for agricultural development, special economic zone development. Can you imagine Auschwitz? Massive barracks, miles, 3 camps, turning into Ritz-Carlton. I'm sure there are a lot of warped rich billionaires who will go and stay, pay for $10,000 a night in the guest chamber or the crematorium. But this is what we are witnessing today in Burma. Aung San Suu Kyi is leading this effort, bringing 600 investors, 300 of whom are from within the European Union. There are many London-based insurance companies that are involved in this. So do we allow civilian Burmese businessmen and enterprises to partake in this because they are not tied to the military? Finally, this has been going on for 40 years. This will not be the last genocide. Thank you.
Thank you both to Margaret and to Zani. So let's go into questions, answers, but also comments. Please feel free to make comments, but questions or answers or comments, keep it as short as you can so that we can have as many participating as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for this afternoon. So I would like to ask you, so can you give us a bit about the Rohingyas who are still living in Myanmar? What are their numbers and exactly where they are living in?
So, firstly, it's really difficult to estimate the numbers of people that we're talking about in Burma right now because a lot of the communities have become very isolated. That's the first point. The second thing is, as I mentioned, things like food rations are severely restricted. Education is non-existent. Healthcare is non-existent. Freedom of movement is non-existent. I think someone mentioned yesterday, I can't remember which speaker particularly, but there are ghettos of camps, and then you have the formal IDP camps as well. And then you have the rest of the civilian population who are living in daily fear. So this morning, actually, there was fire between Arakan Army and the Burmese military in Buttigieg, which is one of the townships which has the larger number of Rohingya left at the moment. Mongdo, which is where the genocide took place, mostly is virtually empty right now. And then you have Ruthiron, which is another township where there are Rohingya populations. But again, it's now become quite sparse and the communications there are severely limited. And put on top of that now, the internet blackout. It's very difficult to get information of the conditions right now.
Can I just say one thing? I think we need to focus on the prospect or possibility of another round of violent waves of attack. But at the same time, on a day-to-day basis, what we have is a situation that has been created or conditioned, created as an act of policy. And in the words of Lemkin, this would be Myanmar government resorting to what Lemkin called racial feeding. The nutritional intake, as not systematic as the Nazis were, but the Burmese know. This population, almost 500,000, 400,000, estimates vary. They live in sub-Saharan-like humanitarian situation, basically semi-famine situation. And this is policy induced. And this is felt every day of their lives. So this is, besides the prospect of being shot or being, gunned down from the helicopter gunship. And I think this is the condition that is maintained with the intent to weaken this community and eventually make them perish. This itself indicates that the genocide is not over.
And just to add on that, just on what you just said there, Zani, this is also a policy which we've seen historically by Burma. It's known as the four cuts. They've done this with the Karen community, Kachin community, and they've done this with the Rohingya on 3 occasions at least in the past. So there's definitely precedence here.
Yes, please, and then Sripaka.
I just want to when international agencies are negotiating with the Myanmar government about the repatriation conditions and prospects, it's somewhat disturbing that Rohingya people are not being consulted. That's what I'm hearing. That when and under what conditions will they return to Myanmar? From our visits, most of the people, they state clearly that they will return to their homeland only if they have food civil liberties and food safety and food circulation. I don't think the Rohingya people are being consulted.
So just on that, when we were doing our questionnaires in November, actually we did it on the day where repatriation was supposed to happen. I think it was November the 5th, if I remember correctly. And myself and Rahima, we were just walking between one camp to another camp, not on the main road, but going through the hills at the back, trying to blend in as much as you can. And this one man watched us. We were just taking photographs. We were just fooling around ourselves, just taking pictures. This one man waited for us to put our cameras away, and he came up to us and he was shaking, physically shaking. He spoke very quickly. He was foaming at the mouth when he was talking. And he said that he didn't understand why his name was on the repatriation list, but his wife, his children, his parents' names were not on the repatriation list in an area called Palankali. And he had removed himself from the night, in the night, with probably another 300 people, and they were staying under the cover of forests in the night out of absolute fear that they were going to be repatriated. And it's what I mentioned again, it's part of the intersection of where they're at, that the Rohingya people, their representation, their voice, their intellect, the scope of their participation in any conversation to do with their future is being not ignored. And I would go so far as to say, almost what Zani is saying is that it's systematic. It's done in Burma anyway. Why is it being done in Bangladesh? And crucially, why are international organizations also excluding that voice? I think there's more to it.
Shripal?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you to Sani. I have 3 points. One, very much we did what we call quick trafficking businesses in Cox's. We found always the same thing, which is digitized. And there are 2 things which came out very clearly. So many things came out very clearly, but one is about possible relocation to Western China. Secondly, about return, possibly return to Myanmar. And then, of course, what we call lack of future. Lack of future says many things that is without having to explain. Second point, we met with about, we have interviewed about 380 people, including Rohingya themselves, but we also talked to different government agencies and civil society groups work in Cox's. Of course, when we visit, we found people who have been living there for 30 years, but we also talked to people who just arrived there over a year ago. And we found a very, some tension within the council. It's not just between Rohingya and surrounding communities, but among the Rohingya. I think this is really worrying when tension is starting to rise. Of course, we don't know what to do, but that's part of trafficking assessment as well. Thirdly, of course, we see more and more small boats arriving to Thailand. Interestingly, those who arrive in small boats, mostly according to non-minority and some organizations, most of them came from the Kaiser, not from South. And I think this is interesting as well because when the situation in Wakar is actually more serious than in the South. At the same time, I think we actually did a meeting last week before we came here. And for the first time, we got not only concern from Bangladesh, but also from Myanmar, from which and I found it interesting because there was no protest against the use of Rohingya throughout the meeting. And I'm not quite sure, at least there is a certain level of tolerance to the name of Rohingya. And I couldn't say that this is correct, but because it's not. But I think dialogue has to be there. When I talk about dialogue, I mean dialogue of stakeholders of the legal unfortunately, of course, they were not there. I'm glad to see that it is more
So just to comment on some of the things, in terms of inter-community kind of tensions, we found the same things. So we found that there were people who arrived 30 years ago who might have had, say, 3 meter by 4 meter homes, that because of the recent arrivals, aid agencies have come and bulldozed them down and really settled them into much smaller shacks. Therefore, there's a discord between them and the new arrivals. Also, old arrivals were not being given tenting material, whereas new arrivals were. So then when they were questioned about this, they were told, you're not a new arrival. So you are having levels of discord for no reason. Also, I think it's important to state there is precedence also of local community and Rohingya community in the past clashing, largely wiped away from records. But around about the early 2000s, there was actually a short period of time where local communities couldn't access the Kutupalong area because it was in control of the Rohingya. And it's been the other way around as well, plenty of times. So that's important to mention. In terms of people going from Cox's Bazar, going from Rakhine, I understand that there was a huge effort actually for a lot of people to leave Cox's Bazar around about September, October, November, December last year, which is normally away from the monsoon season, so it's traveling season, working traveling season. But they were very, very restricted by neighbor forces in Bangladesh. You're right, absolutely, that anyone traveling from Rakhine now, where there is no longer employment opportunities, where there is no longer kind of livelihood opportunities, you can really see the level of kind of conditions that they're in, that they're trying to escape right now. I think that's it.
We might now take 3 or 4 comments before we have the 2 of you respond, if we can. Yeah, in the middle, we'll, okay, and then up to Daniel after.
Thank you both for deep and disturbing presentations. I wanted to ask whether, sort of thinking about prevention of genocide, suppression of genocide, whichever stage we're at, when all the cards are sort of stacked against intervention or a sort of natural resolution, one of the last, and maybe I'll be one of the first, but often one of the last available routes is finding allies within the genocidal society. So maybe it's a caution against indicting the whole society. But I wanted to ask you both, in particular, with respect to your contacts in the military and in terms of in civil society, do you see a prospect of finding allies within Myanmar? People who would object to the current policies could be quietly supported and given over time a chance to become more of a force.
Daniel?
Thanks for the presentation. Basically, my question is very similar because, of course, surely it's interesting to get into the inner workings and the minds of the military and government officials. But I'm always curious as to what is the role of public opinion within the context itself. Why the silence, basically, in other parts of the Bangla Buddhist majority, and similar to the previous question, to what extent can we find solutions from within? Can we address the problem, can we attribute the problem to the issue of religion, the basic foundational teaching of Theravada Buddhism, or is it purely political, or is it purely military? Why is there a general silence, basically?
Amina?
Their life constants if they want better.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. Just like for my own work, this is
But you know, my own work from the field, I mean, I'm talking, you were talking of questionnaires, so I did not do boxes as questionnaires, rather I get to answer what you can call conversation. And this is the new variables. And this I'm talking of December. We started reporting in August, November, December. So education and the freedom of movement and the employment. The women mostly said to me that they have very. It's not that they were saying that there are opportunities in Bangladesh, not at all. Regarding Myanmar, they were saying that they have very limited opportunities in Myanmar, very restricted, and they were saying that they send most of their children to mosques or madrasas, and if they study in madrasas, at least they'll get some job as an imam in the mosque. And for the girls, they said we'll be able to be. Many of those women, that it's a sin for women to have education, so we don't send our girls to schools. All they need to do is learn some basic things and calculations, things like that, and then learn the Quran. That's what they say. And on the question of mobility, also they said made it very clear that they had identity cards. They could not move from one village to another. And that at dawn, the villages would be closed off. This is, I'm talking of Myanmar. And they also said there that they did not have any access to health facilities or hospitals in Myanmar. So, like for emergency patients who have problems, and particularly for pregnant women, even, making references to that. So I was just curious that when you said that they had more freedom of movement and more education in Myanmar, which area was it from, or maybe they were from a different class. If you could, there's a class dimension to all these things, and area spatially also, it might be different. If you can just elaborate something on that. Thank you.
Let's get comments from Mabrul and Zani on these ones, then we'll come back to get some more from you.
Yeah. Finding allies in the genocidal society. I spent 3 years, from 2013 to 2016, running a series of genocide immersion tours through the Khmer Rouge Tribunal and Genocide Documentation Center there. I developed the program myself. That was what I was doing full time. I targeted what we would call opinion makers, spiritual leaders, monks, interfaith leaders, Christian clergy, national book award-winning authors, poets, cartoonists, musicians. About 120, 130 over the course of 3 years. And out of that 130 or so that have returned, only, I say less than 10 people have built up enough courage to even say the word Rohingya. But also, I think the idea that Rohingyas have always been hated is just absolute bogus, untrue. I grew up in Burma. I lived under Ne Win's roof for 24 years, and at 25, I was in California. Never heard of Rohingya because they've been airbrushed out of our historical memories, official documentation, everything, historical archives, everything. Yes, and I came from an urban, middle-class, educated family, and someone like me never heard of the word Rohingya. You cannot hate a people that you've never heard of, nor can you love a people you've never heard of. And then this is completely a new phenomenon, state manufactured, very systematically, using every means of mass communications available. And in this process, become the society, the societal. And I think in this scenario, the second gentleman behind you who repeated similar questions, can we find people that will quietly become a moral force to speak out? On this issue, the state has won. The state has won the Sangha over, not just the 969 or the race and faith group, not just the face of Buddhist Thera Viratu. There is a massive undercurrent of specifically anti-Rohingya. They don't even call the name anti-Bengali. And then there's another dimension. They are portrayed not simply as Muslims, because we have 16 different types of Muslim communities based on migratory histories and different branches of Islam where they are scattered across the country. Rohingyas are the only group of the 16 different types of Muslims in Burma that have a legitimate, provable, historical, and official claim to this region that we call Northern Rakhine. And they have their own administrative region. And, and so this, I mentioned this because I think some of you Bangladeshi would know in 1971, the commander of the West Pakistani Armed Forces issued this chilling order. I want the land, not the people. That is exactly what the Burmese military leadership has done with the support of Burmese. The military wants the land from the situation where it could become annexed to Bangladesh from their paranoid national security thinking. So there is this land dimension. They're not simply seen as Muslim. They're not simply seen as religious contamination. They want the land. And then this is also true in other genocides as well. Living space, Hitler's concept, the East Poland. And then also the Russians are starved and that area will be used to produce food for the Aryan races. So I think in this scenario, by the time a society reaches a point where it is cheering or keeping quiet about the process of genocide unfolding, that society has lost intellectual, moral, and spiritual strength. Yeah? In that scenario, reconciliation, dialogue is not possible. There are always allies with the victims in any genocidal society, a small number, even at the height of Nazism. In Germany, you will find good Germans. That's the word. Yeah? There are good Burmese inside Burma. I'm not the only stupid voice outside. And so I think we need to get out of our head the idea of dialogue and reconciliation cannot be undertaken successfully while the genocide remains unfinished.
Yeah, so the question about civil society, I think they'll probably, the first people that are really going to look to geographically were the Kaman Muslims, who are also geographically from the same area. But I think in 2012, Kaman villages were also raised, so that solidarity went with that. Then it would have been other Muslims in Burma, but then obviously Mekira and then the fires across madrasas in Rangoon. That silenced the mass Muslim community. The only other reasonable voice that you might have expected is probably NLD activists before Suu Kyi came to office. But since she's come to office, obviously that voice is no longer there either. I think the Rohingya find themselves isolated for sure. The term allies of genocide or allies within genocide society, my interpretation of that was, okay, so Burma's committing the genocide. Which other states are they allied with that are also genocidal in intent? So China, Uyghur community, India, Assam, with the D-vultures coming up for people being kind of dehumanized there as well. So I think there's definitely, Burma has allies within the genocide society. I don't know if there is enough communication with victims from Rwanda or Cambodia or from Srebrenica yet. I don't think that that community is mobile or strong enough to be able to lend support to the Rohingya. But I think that's a development area for activists and for academics, and I think that is a potential area where we can maybe focus some of our efforts on.
Can I just say, like, in 30 seconds, there are two concrete things I will propose that Bangladeshi government pursue. One is Gambia in Africa. Why is Gambia leading this effort to take Myanmar to ICG? Most Gambians have never seen a Rohingya. I bet there is not a single Rohingya in Gambia. Yeah, there are 1 million Rohingyas in Bangladesh. Why would Hasina's government not take charge and say, we want Myanmar to be in dispute process at the International Court of Justice until and unless Myanmar takes these people back, and until and unless the international community fulfills its pledges beyond 20%, the current rate, dismal. We want Myanmar to pay $1 billion annually to defray the cost of burdening this population. This is the job of the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister finds this politically, diplomatically difficult, the Parliament has the representatives of the Bangladeshi society should table a similar motion. The Dutch parliamentarian table yesterday, yeah, say Shirin and others, and then like a former Bangladeshi foreign minister, Mr. Mohammed Ali, who was my very generous and gracious host. He brought me to Bangladesh to see the impact of my country's genocide. These leaders could table a motion saying that the Bangladeshi parliament overwhelmingly support the call to take Myanmar to ICJ and claim reparations, compensation for the burden, financial burden, and then like you can calculate ecological destruction, calculate, we bring in economists and they can put numbers for anything. Yeah, even so. Anyway, that's one thing. The other thing is Bangladesh should form a coalition of concerned states to end the genocide. It cannot simply be a Muslim OIC issue. This is a human issue. But yeah.
Just lastly on your question about Burma. So obviously these are answers that the Rohingya themselves give, right? So it's not how we classify levels of access to healthcare or education. So what the Rohingya said was in Burma they have wide access to education, to healthcare, to property, to work. It wasn't really. But in terms of education, there is opportunity with bribes for younger people going into secondary education, go to high schools with bribes. There is opportunity. And in terms of healthcare, the way that that's described, we're not talking about medical facilities and hospitals and stuff like this. We're talking about pharmacies which are available within the little towns. And the poverty is obvious in terms of their homes. And then finally, in terms of employment, we're talking about them being employed, self-employed, if you like, as fishermen and as laborers. So it's just the way that we categorize it, and that's the way actually the Rohingya categorize. This is our freedoms that we enjoy in Burma, as opposed to norms in terms of regular society.
Did they say when they enjoyed those freedoms?
Yeah, I mean, so even up until kind of mid-August, those opportunities were enjoyed. Of course,
we got totally contrary.
Yeah, I mean, from
completely contrary.
But he's qualifying it. He said with bribes.
Yeah, with bribes.
Oh,
so, but in terms of the ID cards as well that you mentioned for movement, the ID cards were there for the recognition of which country they're from. But of course, the movement issue is an issue.
If it is with bribes, it cannot be an opportunity.
But like I said to you, it's what they frame their answer to be, right? So it's not my framing of the answer. So our survey was what privileges do you feel you had in Burma? Not what privileges did you actually have. What privileges did you feel that you had in Burma? Slightly different.
A certain percentage of Rohingyas have Myanmar citizenship. Yeah? Maybe 300,000 or so, and also, that's not right. And those populations, they are allowed to study at Sittwe University and other places, but they are not allowed to study professional fields like medicine, engineering, business. But the other thing is that we have not talked about is the conditions that were designed to basically weaken and eventually, make life impossible on land in Burma, have been in place. Doctor-patient ratio for the rest of the country is 1 doctor is to 2,000 or 3,000 Burmese or Rohingyas or Muslims or Christians, depending on rural or urban areas. Guess what the ratio is? 1 doctor is to 186,000 Rohingya. 1 doctor is to 186,000 Rohingya in 2.5 townships. This was from the Lancer article done by Harvard Public Health. The majority, 80% of the children, infants, and toddlers under the age of 5 are suffering from severe malnutrition. Yeah, in one particular area, the WFP did the survey, and then the infant mortality rates, and then Rakhine doctors, Burmese doctors, would treat those Rohingyas with national registration card that come to the emergency room. Doctors would leave gauze inside the wound after they stitch it up, and then they wrote proudly on Facebook in Burmese language, "This is what I have done to Kala or nigger or Bengali." Yeah, that is why I am calling for total boycott of this society. And then if you have people who spend 20 years behind bars fighting for human rights, they are not the type that can easily be silenced by anybody unless they are willing to remain silent. So we have a total situation here.
Look, just very briefly, the information we got was that things progressively got tighter for the Rohingya from, particularly since the late 1990s, that they were first excluded from the professional courses in the universities by the early 2000s. They were totally excluded from Sittwe University in 2006. From 2012, secondary education was virtually impossible. Now from 2016, it's only primary education that is provided in the camps by untrained teachers. They talked to us about bribes to get the written approval to go from one village to the next, but essentially they were not able to farm, they were not able to fish. The bribes they generally paid for 2 reasons, they said to us. One was because of medical treatment, and sometimes they would have to get approval from every village they passed through between their village and Mongol to the next village. So it could be 6 bribes to get the Mongol for medical treatment. Others paid bribes to get out of the country. And as recently as April, I spoke in May to a woman in April who had to pay a huge amount in bribes to get out of the country. So those that are bribing are still going through. But the situation has progressively over the last 20 years got harder and harder.
Yeah, I mean, without that, I should have qualified it better. This is a sociological study rather than a scientific study where we were asking for their feeling of what they had compared to their feeling of what they have in Bangladesh.
Even if it is a sociological study, you have to, if there is a qualifier, it has to come.
Yeah, and like I said, I should have mentioned it, I didn't mention it. But secondly, the other thing on top of this is also, of course, over the years, it's become tighter and tighter and tighter. You have to understand the mindset of the Rohingya now in Bangladesh. And I think that's really, really important. If you're on a particular diet, if you're living in a particular condition, if your concerns are on basic living, then you romantically look back at Burma.
I think that's right.
And that's the key part of why we were asking about aspirations, as opposed to what does your future hold. It's what do you aspire for? And I should have qualified it earlier on, but yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, please. We've only got time for two more, and then we can take that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zani and Barbara, for both your talks. They've been incredibly refreshing, as always, and poignant as well. I just want to add a little bit, a lot of questions both of you, maybe a little bit maybe during this discussion. With the bribery thing, I mean, just to add to a little bit of extrapolation with the bribing, we actually said both sides. So when we were in Burma, and also obviously in Bangladesh, when we held out these interviews, when we were asking about Burma, we have to, this is something that's already touched on, it was literally a pressure point over 60 years with this genocide, stage 1 genocide, stage 2, stage 3. As part of stage 1, which is one of the things that we've done, so we've been working with the old refugees, the Rohingya refugees, whatever you want to call them. We've been working with the old communities, the old arrivals, for about 15 years now, as well as the new arrivals. And one of the interesting things that we've discovered, and this is something that is often mentioned, is that we've got Rohingya Hindus, we've got Rohingya Muslims. So it's not just focused on what the Rohingya Muslims are suffering. It's not just the Rohingya Muslims children that are going into the schools and are not able to get the education and the access, but it's also the Rohingya Hindus. But we forgot to mention that we also got answers from some of the interviews that we had with the Rohingya Hindu camp in Bangladesh last year and the year before, where up to 300 children actually said that the parents had to pay an extra bit of money in order to get them into the schools, and they still couldn't get into the schools. The mosques were padlocked, so they couldn't access them. This was all in Burma, although obviously, of course, the romantic side of things, like you said. Some of the interesting things said as well, Dr. Zani, is just the way we're looking at this from the outside. And I thought that was quite compelling because it's very difficult to be able to create allies when the genocide is continuing. I mean, Mother and I last week found out about another village that's in the process of being attacked. We've got potential attacks. We've got Basanchar that's still happening. We're in New York in January and February, and we were told that Basanchar Island review would take place, and now we're here, and it still hasn't happened, but there's potential threat of it happening. I spent a month last year working in a think tank, and actually watched people go into hiding because they were going to be repatriated, whilst discussions of questions were being asked them about what do you feel is a dignified approach to being repatriated. What is the question? What is a dignified approach to being repatriated? That's the state that the world is in right now, which is why I find talks like what you both have just done an incredibly important relevant, and hopefully should be conditioning us to change the way in which we support this community. Sorry,
Thank you. That's all right. Do we go?
It's just a quick reflection on Marjorie's call for total sanction and boycott. To be honest, it looks very aspirative, very ambitious within the global international political framework. We cannot undermine that. So if we call, of course we can call, but having the foreign relations with many countries in the neoliberal economic system, how do we see that that could be feasible? Because you know how the whole world is connected.
1 minute each, and then I've got 2 minutes and we finish.
Okay, so I think it's not aspirational to boycott at all. It's a question of leadership. There is no will, and that's why I finished my talk with talking about will. If there was a will to do something about the Burmese situation, it would be done. We know that it's support a special economic zone. We're talking about huge, multi-billion-dollar contracts for various in Burma now. It's in no one's interest whatsoever to call Burma out on the atrocities that it's committing, and that's why it won't happen. But it doesn't mean that we should stop calling for it. Absolutely not.
We cannot will anything. We just have to build it. And so this coming August 23rd and 24th in Seoul, there will be an international conference on the Rohingya, linking the mass rape of Bangladeshi women in 1971, all the way to comfort women of South Korea and Taiwan. And Rohingya woman is the focus, but there will be solidarity. So the call is not total boycott. The call is don't invest in rape. don't invest in rape. Which type of investor, which type of foreign office would want to promote investment in a country where there is an activist civil society global movement call for don't invest in rape? And then finally, genocide is not a single state act of perpetration. It is an interstate. Hitler and the Nazis got the bad press, but most of Europe participated in it, including the United Kingdom, with from the Buckingham Palace to the Foreign Office to number 10 Downing. Neville Chamberlain, yesterday I said, called Hitler a gentleman. What else? Could I say? This is an interstate perpetrating act. Therefore, the solution is not in the states. The solution is among human communities. That's why we have to take this message. We have to have a very, very clear message.
And I'll exercise the chair's privilege of having the last word for this session. Just two very short comments. Firstly, relates to the work that the fact-finding mission is still doing. We expire in mid-September, but we will be producing 4 short reports between now and then. They'll come out progressively. It won't be like the mega report from last year. So there will be 4 reports. One thing that we're looking at in the course of that is what has happened in the last 12 months. And just two points about developments in the last 12 months. The first is about this indicators of the inference of genocide. I referred in my comments yesterday that we had to look at the purpose to destroy in whole or in part a protected group. And we drew from the jurisprudence of Yugoslavia and Rwanda Tribunal indicators of the inference of genocidal purpose. In the last year, I would say that those indicators have strengthened rather than weakened. They have strengthened precisely because of the continuing persecution of the Rohingya people who are left in Rakhine State. So the argument now, after a year, is stronger than it was a year ago, even though we have not seen a recurrence of the extreme brutality of the late 2017 period. But when we look at questions of the law of genocide, we look at indicators and they are continuing examinations and the indicators are stronger. The second thing that we're still in the process of analysing, but I foreshadow to you, we have been looking at what has been going on with the ethnic Rakhine people over the last year, and we've taken a lot of evidence from those that have been affected by the conflict between the Arakan army and the Tatmadaw. And one thing that has struck our investigators strongly is that they have received occasional only allegations of rape rather than near universal allegations of rape that we encountered when interviewing Rohingya women post-August 2017. It would seem, and please don't take this as a final conclusion because we're still doing the analysis, but it would seem that in relation to the current conflict with the Rakhine, we do not have a situation of systematic, widespread rape as a practice of war. Now, if that is the case, what is interesting about that is that if mass rape can be turned off, it implies that mass rape can be turned on. It implies that our conclusion last year that there was a very tight chain of command and a highly disciplined army undertaking the practices in Rakhine against the Rohingya in 2017 was right. Because if this was just the result of aberrant actions by military units, we would expect to see those aberrant actions continued in other contexts, particularly since they are the same units. The good old 33rd and 99 light infantry divisions are there again. So if what appears on initial examination of the evidence is correct, there are significant implications, consequences that we can draw from that. So that's our continuing work. The second and last point I make, this session was about Rohingya voices. And that is extremely important. One of the big changes that I saw in my going to the camps over the last 2 years has been the change from a highly traumatised population to a population where the trauma was being coped with. I'm not sure, I can't say it's being dealt with, but it's being coped with, and the ordinary emergence of leadership is occurring very strongly. We are now encountering strong, articulate, knowledgeable people when we go into the camps. No longer the highly traumatised, incapacitated population that was there on our first visit in October 2017. And they're saying to us, the time has passed when decisions had to be made on our behalf. This is about us. We are capable of making these decisions. We're sick of Bangladesh and Myanmar having discussions about our fate. We're sick of UNHCR and UNDP entering memorandums of understanding with the government of Myanmar. We need to be involved. So the Rohingya voices are there. They're knowledgeable, articulate, and knowing about what they want for their future. And that has to be the starting point for any discussion about how we deal with their situation. Thank you very much to Mabrur and to Zani for your contributions. Thank you to all of you who contributed during the course of this session. Lunch back at 2. Thanks,